Hey, gang, it doesn't matter if your team doesn't score. There's always another way to win on the Playgun Lake online casino and sportsbook app. It's from Bet Parks, and it's the only app that I ever use and recommend to the great state of Michigan. You Michiganders enjoying big-time college football. Detroit hockey is back, and Detroit pro football is on a roll. Pro football on Sunday, Detroit a 2-point underdog at undefeated Minnesota. Wow, Minnesota is undefeated. I didn't recognize that. The over-under is 49 points. Philadelphia is a 3.5-point favorite at MetLife Stadium to play New York's Big Blue. Bet more than just the score, bet player performance. The one and only sportsbook app that I ever recommend in Michigan is Playgun Lake. Get some skin in the game, have some fun, play blackjack, craps, roulette during a timeout or in the dentist's office or wherever you might be, in your Barca lounger. Play with a live dealer right now on your phone. Bet on all your favorite sports. Download the Playgun Lake app right now and enjoy all the action and excitement from the casino at your fingertips. New users, this is for you. A special deal up to $1,000 casino bonus back if you're down in the first 24 hours. That has got to be wagered. It is for new users only. PlayGunLake.com for all the details. Gambling problem, 1-800-GAMBLER. You've got to be in Michigan. Okay, headlines now from the Wednesday edition of the Smerconish.com daily newsletter. Man, there's a lot of good stuff in the newsletter today. I'm so proud of it. The poll question of the day today: will Kamala Harris's interview on Fox News be good or bad for her campaign? Bret Baier got the sit down at Fox News today. It represents a change in the rollout of the Harris campaign. We've talked about this on air extensively. Initially, it was very controlled. You know, it was only 60 minutes, the Bill Whitaker interview that was pretty sharp and an unfriendly potential area. You think about the fact that she was on The View and she was on with Howard and she was on Colbert all in one day, pretty protected. The fact that she's stepping out, does that mean that the Harris internal data is not so favorable? We've spoken extensively about, you take a look at what's going on in this election. The Real Clear Politics average has her ahead by like 2. In the battleground states, it's all margin of error kind of stuff. The fact that she's now going on Bret Baier, is it a sign of panic or is it a sign of confidence? How is this interview going to go for the vice president? Poll question today at Smerconish.com. Will Kamala Harris's interview on Fox News be good or bad for her campaign? Go and cast your ballot. I want to say more about the state of the race and where this is all going. Again, you know the polling data. She's ahead by 2 in a Real Clear Politics national average when I round off. If you look at where we are now as compared to 2016 in round numbers, Hillary Clinton was ahead of Donald Trump by 6 points. She ended up winning the popular vote by 2. Joe Biden was ahead by 10, and he ended up winning the popular vote by 4. Kamala Harris, based on that metric, needs to be ahead by 4 points, and she's not at this stage. Again, we don't elect by popular vote. We elect by the Electoral College, but it's a tell as to how things are going in the race generally. So that's the polling data. What about the betting markets? I am fascinated by this. A great piece from Yahoo Finance that we've linked to today in the newsletter. The highly anticipated U.S. presidential election, just now 21 days away. The poll shows an increasingly tight race, but the prediction markets are saying something different than what's going on in the conventional polling markets. Are the betting markets more reliable? That's the question. Prediction markets tell a different story. Predict It shows Trump's campaign in the lead as the 2024 presidential election winner. It also has the GOP winning the presidency and the Electoral College margin. Polymarket, as of Monday, so this is a little bit old, is a cryptocurrency-based prediction market. It shows Trump with a better chance of winning the election. So Polymarket, 54% chance. Predict It, you know, they express it in cents. You bet 54 cents. That means that Trump is the 54% winner, according to those two marketplaces. And actually, I can read the data. Oh, and it's interesting because Harry Crane, the statistics professor at Rutgers University, is quoted in this story. He was my in-studio guest just a week ago in Philadelphia. But I can make sense of this because maybe what it's saying is, Yes, Harris is ahead in the popular vote now, but she's not ahead enough to secure her victory. She's more in line with Hillary than she is in line with where Biden was. Consequently, perhaps the betting markets, which respond much more quickly to information because there's constant wagering, maybe that's a better snapshot of where the race stands. Now, here's a different way of looking at it. If you don't want to look at the betting markets, if you don't want to look at the polls, how about the cultural touchstones? John Kenneth White, we're going to have to get him on the program. He's a professor emeritus at Catholic University of America. His latest book is titled Grand Old Unraveling. He wrote for The Hill, and he says sometimes a better predictor of our political futures is found in pop culture. And here's his explanation. In 1940, Woody Guthrie composed a blistering rebuttal to Irving Berlin's classic tune, God Bless America. In This Land Is Your Land, Guthrie sang of the dispossessed and the need for equity, powerful reminders of FDR's continued appeal. That year, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won a comfortable victory. In 1984, Ronald Reagan coasted to landslide victory. While the polls predicted a comfortable Reagan win, the signs were already present in the zeitgeist. Two of the most popular television shows that year were Family Ties and The Cosby Show. Family Ties saw Michael J. Fox play Alex P. Keaton, who, as the ardent Reaganite, castigated government and praised free markets to the annoyance of his 1960s Democratic parents. The Cosby Show depicted Bill Cosby as the amiable Dr. Cliff Huxtable, married to the successful African-American woman and whose children respected their parents. The show echoed Reagan's values mantra of family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom, a point that was echoed by Cosby himself. So do these cultural touch points suggest what's going on in this election? Here's the argument. Today, the cultural signs point in Vice President Harris's direction. Over the summer, Charlie XCX tweeted, "Kamala is brat." The message played on the title of her album, Brat, which became a top seller. Next, the most popular and powerful musician of the era, Taylor Swift, quickly followed up with a Harris endorsement. Swift's support packed a punch. More than 400,000 people registered to vote after her announcement. An angry Trump then protested, "I hate Taylor Swift." Another powerful voice, Bruce Springsteen, also announced his support for Harris. Throughout his career, Springsteen, argues this essay, has consistently reflected the popular mood. When he emerged as a superstar in 1984 with his hit album, Born in the USA, one fan said he liked Springsteen's message about faith and traditional values. You get the whole gist? Okay, one more of these in terms of, can the cultural moment, can the cultural touchstones predict an election outcome? Quote, perhaps no better sign of an important trend in pop culture than the success of the Apple Plus TV series Ted Lasso. Lasso became the embodiment of kindness and decency, qualities opposite those associated with Trump. Jason Sudeikis, the actor who played Lasso, saw the series' success as a call for change. I hated how people weren't listening to one another. Things became very binary. And I don't think that's the way that the world works. His character echoed a similar sentiment, saying he wanted to be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, by this logic, Kamala Harris's pledge to turn the page and point a new way favor echoes the Lasso theme. Like Ted Lasso, Kamala Harris wants to end the anger and bring not just decorum, but joy to our politics. Jason Sudeikis agrees. He was spotted at a WNBA playoff game wearing a shirt with the slogan, Harris and Walls and Joy and Liberty. Meanwhile, Trump is summoning up the cultural icons of yesteryear, reveling in the endorsements of Kid Rock, Hulk Hogan, and Kanye West. So you can take your pick. You can look at the polling data, which says it's neck and neck, but Harris might not have the margin she needs. You can look at the betting markets, which say Donald Trump has the advantage. Or you can look at the cultural touchstones and come to a different conclusion and say, Harris better suits the mood of the country right now. Pretty cool, right? More headlines now from the Wednesday edition of the Smerconish.com daily newsletter. Jeff Greenfield is a friend. Jeff Greenfield has been a guest on this program on any number of occasions. He has also been a guest of mine on CNN. He's got a Politico essay, which is interesting. I spoke a week ago and did a CNN commentary, and I said maybe the October surprise this cycle is that there will be no surprise. And I said that because so many things have occurred that haven't moved the needle. Why would we think in these final 3 weeks that something's going to occur and all of a sudden the election is going to take shape? I'm dubious. But here's a different perspective from Greenfield. He says, now that you have read the 500th poll of the battleground states, the thousands of simulations, the scientific and pseudoscientific calculations, the hourly assertions of how close the contest is, you might want to take a breath and contemplate the possibility that the factor that will determine the outcome may not have happened yet. At least, he says, that's what our recent political history suggests. Again and again, close presidential contests have been overtaken by last-minute events that rendered the months of analyses and speculation inoperative. Historians can debate the ultimate impact of these moments, but they have emerged often enough that they should provide a good dose of humility to any assessment of the outcome. He talks about the Iranian hostages, the 52 Iranian hostages being held at the time of the 1980 election, Jimmy Carter against Ronald Reagan. That's where October surprise first came into the vernacular, because the surprise was supposed to be that Jimmy Carter would win the release of the hostages close in time to the election, and then he would pull an upset over Ronald Reagan. It didn't happen. But that's where October surprise comes from. George W. Bush running in the 2000 election with the very late-breaking DUI story, an October surprise. Jim Comey in 2016, an October surprise. Greenfield says that sometimes October surprises don't happen until November. Here's an example. In 2004, 4 days before the presidential election, a new video surfaced from Osama bin Laden. Do you remember this? Accepting responsibility for the September 11 attacks and warning the U.S. not to strike Muslim nations. Democratic candidate John Kerry later pointed to the tape as a key reason for his narrow defeat by Bush, since it put terrorism in the spotlight again. And then here's the way that he concludes, Jeff Greenfield, his analysis as to whether there will be an October surprise now. He says, if this history is not enough evidence that the unknown unknowns have the potential to upend the campaign, consider just the events this past year. In January, Politico magazine asked about a dozen of us to suggest events that might disrupt what seemed at the time to be an extremely static race. The fact is, many of those predictions have already happened: devastating hurricanes, rising global conflict, a violent assault on a candidate. And then Greenfield says, here was the contribution that he made back in January when Politico came to he and other pundits and said, what might happen that's a surprise? And this is kind of telling. Greenfield said, every time Joe Biden steps on a stage or off a plane, his supporters hold their breath. With most voters, including Democrats, thinking that he's too old to be president, a highly public stumble, physical or verbal, could turn that belief into a serious demand for someone else to take his place. So when you read of the remarkable stability of the 2024 election, the relatively minor movement in the polls, the reasonable assertions that issues like immigration, inflation, or abortion will be decisive, just keep in mind that if past is prologue, we may still be in for a surprise. More headlines from the Wednesday edition of the newsletter. This comes from Gallup. This is amazing to me. You've got to see the graph if you're watching on YouTube that goes along with this story. Gallup asks the question about America. Well, actually, I'll read it to you. Here's the question. In general, how much trust and confidence do you have in the mass media, such as newspapers, TV, and radio, when it comes to reporting the news fully, accurately, and fairly? And your answers can be a great deal of trust, a fair amount of trust, not very much, or none at all. The most stunning thing to me is that if you go back to 1976, I think they first asked the question in 1972, 70+% of the American people in 1976, actually, I can explain that high watermark. They said that they had a great deal or fair amount of trust in the media. Now, think about it. Why in 1976 would there have been trust in the media? Probably because of the role that Woodward and Bernstein played in exposing the Nixon administration. Where is that number today? What was in 1976 70+%? It's now 31%. It is now 31%. Partisans have different levels of confidence in the media to report news fully and accurately. Currently, 54% of Democrats, 27% of independents, 12% of Republicans say they have a great deal or fair amount of trust in the media. To which I would say to the only 12% of Republicans, well, do you have trust in Fox News? I mean, the media today is whatever you want the media to be. Going back to betting markets, I thought this was interesting. Jake Paul and Mike Tyson are a month out from their upcoming fight. And there's a disconnect in the betting markets in terms of how Tyson and Paul are regarded. So in other words, Tyson remains the underdog, largely because he's 3 decades older than Paul. Paul's 27, Tyson is 58. And yet more money has been wagered on Tyson than Paul at the prominent sports books like DraftKings, Caesars, and the Westgate Sportsbook. So the odds makers are saying that Paul is the favorite, Jake Paul, and yet the betting markets, the recreational bettors, I think that's how I would say it, are going with Mike Tyson. I think I understand that. I think it's an age thing. I think that it's people who are my age and remember, Mike Tyson as such a tornado that he was in the what would it have been, late 80s, but 1990s, in that Trump era of Atlantic City, are probably now the sort who are betting, have a little bit of money in their pocket, remember fondly the Tyson era, and are probably laying that on Tyson and throwing off the betting. Jay Cornegay, Executive Vice President of Race and Sportsbook Operations at Westgate, pointed to Paul's odds as a factor. They're as low as -330 on money line, meaning that a winning bet of 300 on Paul yields a profit of $100. Recreational players, he says, they don't like to lay -300. By contrast, Tyson's odds are as high as +275, meaning a winning bet of $100 would yield a profit of $275. There's a lot stacked up against Tyson, but I think the recreational bets aren't going to care, says Johnny Corrales, an experienced sports bettor who specializes in combat sports. He said, I think that you've got the perfect storm for a lot of betting action on the underdog. And then one more story today that I point out, and again, so many disparate stories, not only everything that you want to know about the 2024 election, but also just a lot of good information. My intent, my mantra is to deliver balance every day in the newsletter. I assume that you are all registered for it by now. I hope you are. It's free. It's worthy. It's informative. You'll get it by 8 a.m. or thereabouts Eastern time every day, 7 days a week. This story from the Wall Street Journal caught my eye, and I've been thinking about this. Why do we still sign our credit card receipts? Right? You go to dinner and you've got to, leave the tip. I mean, that might be a reason, because without them needing your signature, maybe you're going to leave without the tip. That's a factor. But even in circumstances where you're using a credit card and there's no tip expected, we're still signing. And I always wonder to myself, where are all these little receipts going, and who is tracking them? The Wall Street Journal today points out that they're meaningless in many instances. Despite being unnecessary for fraud prevention, signatures on credit card receipts persist due to tradition and outdated point-of-sale systems. Signatures are no longer required for most electronic transactions, including restaurant checks and even some Social Security forms. While signatures are still used on checks, they are less scrutinized than other fraud-detected measures. The story begins this way. Businesses that keep the signature line, actually, this is the heart of the matter in the explanation. Businesses that keep the signature line either don't want to alarm customers who expect to sign, or they are still using older point-of-sale systems that print the line by default, according to the chief executive of Merchant Advisory Group, They are a retail advocacy group. So signatures don't die. We continue to be asked to sign with ink on paper or using fingers or on touch screens at many restaurants, bars, and other businesses. And people keep signing card receipts out of habit, even when there's no blank space for it, because it feels weird not to. The payment networks and retail groups are saying. Doug Cantor, general counsel of the National Association of Convenience Stores, says traditions have this odd way of sticking around. All right, go to Smerconish.com, cast your ballot now on the question of whether Kamala Harris is going to benefit from the Bret Baier interview. Answer that question. Watch the interview later. We'll talk about it tomorrow on the program for sure. While you're there, suggest a poll question of your own. We love it when you make those suggestions.